is Shannon Knapp, president of Invicta Fighting Championships, and you're listening to WMMA Scene Now. Why go anywhere else?
All right. Welcome back to WMMA Scene Now with your host, Chuck Stevenson, and welcome to episode number 45 of the WMMA Scene Report, our weekly show where we go over results, news, upcoming fights, just about everything going on within the scene of women's mixed martial arts. As always, let's get started with the results from last weekend. So first up, we had one championship Masters of Fate in Manila, Philippines. In the strawweight division, we had Nong Stamp Fairtex coming in at 2-0. She was taking on B Win, who's coming in at 5-4. Okay, I did a full review on this. If you want, you can feel free to check it out. This was an utter beatdown, basically, by Stamp Fairtex over B Win. B Win showed a lot of heart, but man, it was basically a beatdown from bell to bell. B did land a couple left-hand shots that were kind of nice, but Fairtex, who was a physically superior fighter and just straight up bigger fighter, just shrugged them off. Practically laughed them off. It's a good example of someone who has been fighting their entire life versus someone who, may have been in MMA longer, but that doesn't compare to a whole lifetime of fighting. Next one after that was Bellator 233. A couple ladies fights, both in the featherweight division. First up, Amanda Bell defeated Janae Harding via TKO due to ground and pound at 4 minutes 44 seconds of the third round. Bell climbed to 7-6. Harding fell to 5-4. This was a pretty good fight. I was actually impressed by this fight. There's a lot of back and forth action. I thought Harding took the first round. Bell took the second, and then, of course, finished it in the third. But she really took over and was really starting to take over in the third as well. I thought that Harding was landing the better striking, especially in the first round. But then by the third round, Bell was taking over more and more with everything. A lot of mistakes made between these two, but they showed a lot of improvements, particularly Harding. But Bell surprised me as well with her increased, in-ring IQ. She was showing more diversity in her game. Overall, impressed with this fight. Also on that card, and also at featherweight, Arlene Blencoe defeated Leslie Smith via unanimous decision. Blencoe climbed to 13-7. Smith fell to 11-8. This was a good example of a fighter who was down after the first round, a technical fighter who was losing to a brawler, but then ultimately showed how to. There's an old phrase in boxing: you brawl the boxer, you box the brawler. Well, Blencoe boxed the brawler. She basically figured out Smith's whole game after the first round, and Smith's game is basically drive forward, try to walk the opponent up against the fence, and then unload with winning strikes. Blencoe figured it out, started using her jab a lot more, and just really nice performance by Arlene Blencoe. Also that same night, these all happened on Friday at Combate Americas number 49 in San Antonio. Main event, I believe, Nadine Mandiao defeated Melissa Thunder Rosa Cervantes via unanimous decision. This was at strawweight. Mandiao climbed to 1-1. Cervantes fell to 0-1. Cervantes, of course, is known more on the indie circuit of pro wrestling as Thunder Rosa. I haven't gotten around to watching this fight yet. From what I understood, it was a gutsy performance by Cervantes, but Mandiao just knew the MMA game better. Moving along to Saturday, early Saturday morning in the U.S. Road FC number 56. Also, the Young Guns prelims. It was Young Guns number 45. Two ladies fights. Both ended in finishes, too. So, Jisoo Park defeated Eun Jung Lee at in the strawweight division, Park defeated Lee via TKO due to punches at 25 seconds of the first round. Jisoo Park climbed to 1-0. Jung Lee fell to 0-2. Park showed a surprising awareness of her length and reach for a debutante fighter. I was very impressed with that. Lee was coming forward trying to bum rush her with strikes, held her head down, but Park knew that she had the length and reach. Park kept her on the edge of her punches and just overwhelmed Lee with volume. Very impressed by a debutante fighter that knew how to use her reach advantage. Most experienced MMA fighters, not just in the women, but in the men, a lot of MMA fighters just don't know how to use their reach to their advantage. So that was really interesting to see. And then at 139-pound catchweight, Ha-Jung Park defeated Nayeon Park via TKO due to punches at 40 seconds of the first round. Park climbed to 1-1, or Ha-Jung Park climbed to 1-1. Nayeon Park fell to 0-2. There are clips of this online. I think the full fight might be up by now on YouTube. Watch this for the finishing sequence. Ha-Jung Park set Nayeon up with two left hooks that kind of stung Nayeon, and it left her vulnerable, leaning to her left-hand side, and then Ha-Jung followed the hooks up with a nice straight right to the chin of Nayeon, and it knocked her down. Park went to swarm her with strikes on the ground, and the ref was intervened like immediately. Another nice finish there from South Korea in Road FC. Saturday afternoon, Eastern Standard Time, was UFC Moscow. One ladies fight on the prelims at bantamweight. Pani Kianzad defeated Jessica Rose Clark due to unanimous decision. Kianzad climbed to 12-5. Clark fell to 9-6. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten around to watching this fight yet. I heard Kianzad showed a very nice game throughout this fight, however. So, nice return to the UFC for Kianzad. Unfortunately, Clark lost another in her move back up to bantamweight. And then finally, on Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, Eastern Time, Pancrase number 310, an atomweight fight. Sayako Fujita defeated Yerin Hong via unanimous decision. Fujita climbed to 5-1. Yerin Hong fell to 0-1. This was supposed to be a setup fight for Fujita. I mean, it's obvious. Why would they give her a debutante otherwise when she already had 5 fights? But I'll tell you what, Hong, I think they brought her in because they knew she had a striking background and Fujita was going to try to get her to the ground and beat on her and submit her. But Hong showed a surprisingly very intelligent ground game for someone who hadn't been training that long. And she's only 16 or 17 years old. So Fujita got the win that Pancrase wanted her to, but it was a lot harder earned than what it was meant to be. So, okay, that was it for fights this past weekend. Now let's move on to the news. First up, a couple of fights announced for Aries FC1, December 14th in Dakar, Senegal, and I got word earlier that this is going to be aired on UFC Fight Pass. 2 bantamweight fights. The return of Rizlan Zoak, who is 3-1. She is taking on Yamila Sandora of Brazil, who is 5-0. And then also at bantamweight, Antonio Moreira making her debut. I believe she's Brazilian, taking on Stephanie Egger, who is 4-1. Egger's from, I believe, somewhere in Europe. At Octagon MMA Prime 3 on February 15th. Next year, we have bantamweight fight. Eva Borodakova, coming off a successful pro debut, versus Ivana Haskova, also coming off a successful pro debut. So 1-0 versus 1-0 there. And that is, I want to say in the Ukraine, but it's definitely somewhere in Eastern Europe. Brave CF That's Brave Combat Federation announced 2 ladies fights for their card on November 23rd in Hyderabad, India. First up at strawweight is Salman Baik, 3-3, taking on India's Manjit Kolakar, who is 11-3. And then also at strawweight, Polish Karolina Wojcik, 5-2, taking on Brazil's Maria Ribeiro, who is also 5-2. Wojcik is the former EFC Africa champion. In one championship news, unfortunate injury bug keeps going around. One championship flyweight, Tiffany Teo, has withdrawn from her fight against Mara Mazar at One Edge of Greatness on November 22nd. Teo will be undergoing eye surgery on November 15th for retina tears in both eyes. The status of Mazar remaining on the card is unknown at this time. So hopefully they'll find a replacement for Mazar, keep the fight on the card, and best of luck to Tiffany Teo on your eye surgeries, and hope for a speedy recovery. At Prospect FC 12, December 6th in Windsor, Ontario, has a couple of ladies' fights. I just found out about these earlier. Megan Owen at strawweight making her debut versus Ashley Letourneau, who is 0-1. And then also at strawweight, Randy Field, who is 1-0, taking on former King of the Cage atomweight champ Melissa Karagianis. Let me find her record here real quick. She is coming in with a 3-5 record, and she's moving back up to strawweight for this fight. A couple of UFC fight announcements to end out the news. First up, UFC Fight Night Houston on February 8th. Is going to be a flyweight fight between Andrea KGB Lee, coming in 11-3, and she's taking on Ultimate Fighter alum and former Invicta champ, bantamweight champ Lauren Murphy, coming in with a record of 11-4. And then at UFC 246 on January 18th, another flyweight fight. Roxanne Modafferi, who's 23-16, is going to be taking on the fast-rising Macy Barber, coming in with a perfect record of 8-0. That should be a very good fight. I know a lot of people are taking Barber, but I think they're sleeping. I've already seen it online earlier. A lot of people are taking Barber, but I think they're sleeping on Modafferi because, don't forget, she was a big underdog against Antonina Shevchenko as well. All right, so that's the news, which takes us to our weekly UFC rankings update, a little section I like to call the fuckery. And all I gotta do is read these these single updates on here, and you'll explain why I like to call it that. So the only changes after this past weekend are at bantamweight, and it involves neither of the two fighters that fought at bantamweight this past weekend. Irene Aldana has moved down 2 spots from number 8 to number 10. Meanwhile, Marion Renault and McMahon move up 1 spot each, Renault to number 8 and McMahon up to number 9. Okay, Aldana's coming off a win. Renault is coming off a loss. McMahon hasn't fought since 2017, also coming off a loss. It makes no sense. That's why I like to call this section, this little segment, the fuckery. Because there's always something stupid going on in the UFC rankings. Rarely ever do they make sense. Just ever. Next up, a little section I like to call Welcome to the Scene, where we welcome some of the newest subscribers. I only can add you to this list if your settings are set that your subscriptions are made public. So, pease it. Welcome to the scene. Which brings us then up to the upcoming fights for this weekend. A little bit of a preview here. First up at Bellator 234. Now this is going to take place on Thursday evening in Israel. However, it is going to be on tape delay until Friday evening on DAZN and Paramount. And listen, this is all on Paramount. Bellator gets a lot of crap for these tape delays. Don't blame Bellator. Blame Paramount. Call Paramount, email them, go on their social media, whatever. Blame Paramount and tell them, listen, we're sick and tired of these tape delays. Granted, who wants to watch an event going on in the middle of the day Thursday? But for over 24 hours delay, I will agree, is ridiculous. Anyway, Bellator 234, one ladies fight in the featherweight division. Olga Rubin, 6-1, taking on Sinead Kavanaugh, coming in at 5-4. Looking at the stats, I don't have an age for Kavanaugh. Rubin is 30 years old, and Rubin will have a 3-inch height advantage, 5'9" to 174 centimeters, to Kavanaugh's 5'6", 168 centimeters, and will also have a sizable reach advantage, 69 inches or 175 centimeters, to Kavanaugh's 65 inches or 165 centimeters. And I'll be honest, I am taking Rubin on this one. I think she is. Both of these ladies prefer to strike. I think that Kavanaugh hits a little harder, but Rubin is going to hit cleaner, and she's going to throw more often. So I'm going to go with Rubin on this. Kavanaugh is just not that good. Rubin hasn't exactly shown her true potential exactly, but I think that she definitely has a lot more than what Kavanaugh has shown so far in slightly more fights. Excuse me. Moving along to Friday night, and this will be live. First time ever on UFC Fight Pass. Legacy Fighting Alliance, LFA 78, is going to have two ladies fights. First up at strawweight, Cheyenne, I believe her new name is Bias. It used to be Vlismus and she got married. Coming in at 3-1, taking on Rebecca Adney, who is 0-2. I don't have an age for Bias or for Adney. Cheyenne is 24 years old. Looks like Adney will have a 1-inch height advantage, 5'5" to 5'4". I don't have a height or reach statistic for Adney. However, Vlismus is listed at 63.5 inches or 161 centimeters. I'm going with Vlismus on this. And I'll tell you why after I read off the second fight as well. Which the second fight is up higher on the card. The co-main event of the evening. Haley All Hail Cowan taking on Lisa Malden. This is at flyweight, I believe I mentioned. Cowan is 4-0. Malden is 3-1. Malden's the older fighter, 29 years to 27. Cowan is the taller fighter, 5 feet 9 inches, 175 centimeters, to Malden's 5 feet 7 inches, 170 centimeters. And Cowan will have a sizable reach advantage, 71 inches or 180 centimeters, to Malden's 66.5 inches or 169 centimeters. And I am taking Cowan on this one. Okay, the reason I'm picking Vlismus and Cowan, LFA is very predictable in their matchmaking. Always bet on pretty when it comes to LFA matchmaking, and always bet on blonde. And this isn't anything against the fighters. Please understand, I am not bashing the fighters in this. I am just saying that LFA picks favorites and slowly builds them up. They did it with Andrea KGB Lee. They did it with Macy Barber. They did it with Sabina Mazo. LFA slow builds the chosen fighters, and they're almost always fighters who are the prettier ones. Granted, they have to have skill because they got to keep winning, but they're always pushing the prettier fighters. So when it comes to LFA fights, always bet on pretty and always bet on blonde. So that's why I'm taking Vlismus and Cowan in these two fights. And I think if you look at the records and the skill levels, it's just that obvious, especially Vlismus versus Adney. And No offense to Adney, who is a 18-year Army veteran, so fellow veteran. Next up is going to be in Washington, Array Heights, Washington. Northern Quest Casino and Resort. It's Excite Fight Conquest of the Cage. And the only reason I'm bringing this up, normally I wouldn't talk about a Cindy Dandwell fight, but Cindy Dandwell is taking on an opponent in this at featherweight, but also this is the fight where her daughter is taking on another 11-year-old. So it's two 11-year-olds going to do battle under amateur rules. I read an article, an interview with the promoter, and he is making them wear full safety equipment too. So headgear, shin guards, bigger gloves, everything. But I'm bringing this up mostly because it is the first ever mother-daughter to be on the same MMA card in history, as far as I can tell. Bellator has done it several times with father-sons. The Thursday event is another one with the Gonzalez, but this will be the first ever mother-daughter taking part on the same fight card. All right, moving along to Saturday. One Championship, Age of Dragons, has a pair of ladies MMA fights. There's a ladies kickboxing fight too, but I'm sticking to MMA. First up, at strawweight, 115 pounds, Ritu Phogat making her pro debut versus Nam Hee Kim, also making her pro debut. Looking at the stats that are available, there's nothing available for Kim. Phogat is 25 years old. She is 5 feet 1 inch tall. Don't have a reach for her. And for Nam Hee Kim, nothing. I'm going with Phogat on this one, and I'll tell you why. Phogat is being brought in to help break One Championship into the Indian market. She is a Commonwealth Games champion, or at least medalist in wrestling. And her and her sisters are famous wrestling family. Their dad was, I guess, a good wrestler, or their coach or something. And they are so well known in India that the highest grossing movie in Indian history, I believe it's called Dangal, was based on their story. So they are bringing in Phogat to win this. Now, Nam Hee Kim is coming in as a replacement for, I want to say, Cindy Tiong. However, they scouted Kim to... They knew what they were doing when they brought in Nam Hee Kim. She's had one amateur MMA fight, and she got taken down repeatedly over the course of 2 rounds. So this is a setup fight for Ritu Phogat. Bet the house on Ritu Phogat to win this. If you're a betting person. I'm not. But if I was, I'd bet the house on Ritu Phogat. And their other ladies fight, also going to be at 115 pounds, it looks like. Main Bow coming in at 13-5, taking on Laura La Gladiadora Balin, 11-5. I don't... looking at the stats, I have nothing for Balin, surprisingly. Main Bow is listed at 5 feet 4 inches tall. Main Bow is well known for being the only... for a long time, she was the only fighter to defeat Seong Jin Nan, and that was way back in... Or no, I'm sorry. She is the only fighter to have defeated Wei Li Zhan in her career. That was back in 2013. Yes. Yeah, she beat Wei Li Zhan back in 2013 in their first fight each, I believe. So, One Championship's definitely... They might not market her as that, but it'll definitely be subtle. Looking at who they've been fighting, Main Bow, she never fights any tough fights. She's coming in on a 3-fight win streak, Before that, she had a loss to Lilia Shakarova. That was 2 years ago. Ballin, on the other hand, is coming in off of 2 losses to Ayaka Miura and then Vivi May Yamaguchi. I'm going to go with Main Bow on this one. I think they're using Ballin, who's coming off the 2 losses, to at least they're hoping to set up a winnable fight for Meng Bo. And then they can say, we have the only fighter ever to beat the UFC champion, Weili Zhang. So, yeah. I see you won championship. Then finally, on Saturday evening, UFC Sao Paulo. Couple of ladies fights on here. First up, bantamweight fight. Both of these fighters came in as replacements for other fighters. Tracy Cortez, 6-1, who is replacing Duda Santana? No, I forget who she's replacing. Leah Letson is who Tracy Cortez is replacing. Cortez coming in 6-1, taking on Vanessa Milo, 10-6, who is replacing Duda Santana. And honestly, this makes for a much more interesting fight than Cortez versus Santana. Cortez coming in, she's 25 years old. Milo is 31. They're both 5 feet 5 inches tall, or 165 centimeters. And Cortez has a longer reach, 67 inches or 170 centimeters, to Milo's 65 inches or 165 centimeters. Now Cortez is moving up to bantamweight. She's been fighting at flyweight her whole career. Milo is coming in off as a career bantamweight, I believe. Milo is coming off, of course, a loss to Irene Aldana, and I believe it was her UFC debut. Yep. About a month and a half back. Cortez coming in off a successful win in the Dana White's Contender Series over Maria Agapova, who has picked up 2 wins herself in Invicta. I think this is going to be a tougher fight for Cortez than Santana was. However, I'm still going to go with Cortez because she was actually preparing longer for this fight than Milo is. Milo came in, I believe, just last week. So I'm going to go with Tracy Cortez to win this one. But I'm not as sure on that one as some of the other fights. Which brings us up down to a flyweight fight. Ariana, the Violence Queen Lipski, taking on Veronica Macedo. Lipski 11-5, Macedo 6-3-1. Now, Lipski is coming into this fight on 2 fights loss streak. First to Joanne Calderwood in her UFC debut, and then she dropped a unanimous decision to Molly McCann 4 months back. Macedo came into the UFC and lost 3 straight to Ashley Evans-Smith, Andrea Lee, and then Jillian Robertson, all in succession. However, she picked up her first UFC win over Polyana Viana 3 months ago. Both of these fighters have underperformed throughout their UFC career, basically. Looking at the stats, Lipski is 1 year older, 25-24 for Macedo. Lipski is 2 inches taller, or 168 centimeters to 163. And Lipski will have a reach advantage of 3 inches, 67 inches, or 170 centimeters to Macedo's 64 inches, 163 centimeters. Now, Macedo is getting ready to fight in next month in December in Korea. Got called in to replace another Brazilian on this card, Priscila Cachoeira. Cachoeira was pulled last week from a failed anti-doping test. However, I gotta go with Macedo on this one. Lipski has just underperformed worse than well, I'm not going to say worse than anyone else or worse than someone else. Let's just say this. For all the hype she came in with into the UFC, she has really underperformed. Now, Macedo didn't have a whole lot of hype coming in. She was undefeated besides a draw, but she didn't have like as much hype coming in as Lipsky did from KSW. So they're both primarily strikers. Macedo's a little on the small side for even flyweight, but I think she's shown more heart in her fights than Lipsky has. Lipsky has the skills, and so does Macedo, but I don't think Lipsky has the heart that Macedo does when she's in trouble spots. So I'm going to go with Veronica Macedo. All right, so that's the fights coming up this weekend. So now I want to get into discussion time. And if you saw the headline of the video, it's merit versus marketability. There's always this discussion about, fighters moving up their rankings for different reasons, fighters getting pushed for different reasons. So I really wanted to talk about merit versus marketability in fighting, and then I'm going to give some good examples of fighters who represent, both sides or a combination. So first up, what is merit in fighting? Merit means that a fighter gets promoted based on abilities and accomplishments. It's how well they fight, who they win, what accomplishments they make. If a fighter is getting promoted based on wins alone, then they are a fighter getting promoted based on a meritocracy. However, on the other hand, you have marketability. If a fighter is getting promoted based on perceived ability to sell, usually with the hope that their skills pan out. So you'll see fighters that are based purely on marketability, and they're getting a push early in their careers, and they haven't shown that they're necessarily a contender yet, maybe possibly a prospect, but they're getting a big push anyway. It's usually based on perceived marketability. Now you can drop fighters into one of three categories usually. The first group is that most fighters hope, and most of them have to, get by on merit. All right. Maybe they lack charisma. Maybe they're quiet. Maybe they're shy. They don't possess the it factor. Very few of these fighters become big stars. Now, there's definitely some of the fighters from this group that become champions. I would say most MMA champions fit into this first group. They get to the championship based on purely on merit, but they don't always become big stars. If you've ever seen okay, let's take Mighty Mouse for example. Mighty Mouse was the champion based on pure merit in the UFC. He's a flyweight champion. They tried to market him, and they just couldn't market him well. So that's a good example of a truly merit-based fighter. Now, some fighters fall into the second category, and they get pushed based on perceived marketability due to charisma, looks, nationality, a built-in following from a previous sport or something else, whatever they come in for. Now some of these fighters achieve success, but others oftentimes get exposed due to a lack of skills and ability. I'm definitely going to give some examples of this one later. And then you have the third group, which is the rarest group. Those who have both marketability and the ability to back up that marketability. The in-ring ability. Not all these fighters become champions, but some of them become superstars. Yeah, I have at least one example of these later on. If you want me to name a male, Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is a superstar, and he has the skills to back it up, but he's just not championship material. That's an example of of someone like that. There's numerous fighters that are like this. No, I won't say numerous. These are actually, like I said, these are the rarest group because they can talk the talk, they walk the walk. Fans want to follow them for more than just what they do in the ring. Like I said, this is the rarest group. All right, so then we get into how promoters promote fights on this. All right, now obviously promoters wish that the third group, the rarest group, were plentiful and easy to find. It would make their job so much easier if every fighter could be both marketable and a great fighter. There would be no need for promoters to do their job. The fights would sell themselves all the time. However, most often they have to work with the first group, which is the fighters that get by on merit, and sell them based purely on ability. And, you know, in team sports, you can have athletes that become superstars based purely on merit. In fight sports, combat sports, it's not so easy. Fighters got to have a reason. Fans need a reason to follow certain fighters, and only the most hardcore fans follow fighters based purely on their ability. And hardcore fans, promoters don't make money based on hardcore fans. They just don't. Hardcore fans love to think that they're the be-all and end-all, but they're really not. And then lastly, promoters will often sign fighters of the second group, which is the all marketability group. Promoters will often sign fighters of the second group, hoping that they prove as good in the cage as out of it. They'll bring them along slowly at first, but too often eventually rush them or throw them into a sink or swim fight. If the fighter proves themselves, great. If not, oh well, because guess what? They can replace them easily enough with another marketable fighter. So, yeah, if promoters could get nothing but fighters who were both marketable and great in the ring, yeah, they'd stack their roster with it. But they have to stack their roster with guys who aren't as marketable but have the skills to back it up. That's really what most combat sports is based on. But occasionally, they get the fighters that can sell, or at least they hope can sell, and then they'll try to. Smart promoters will bring those fighters along slowly, incrementally tougher fights. But eventually, most promoters fall into, all right, let's rush this one, put him in against a title contender, and then it's basically sink or swim at that point for the marketable fighter. If they win, great. If not, oh well, we'll use you until your marketability runs out, and then we'll replace you with someone else. All right, so that's the boring bit of this. Let's get into some examples. I've got 10 fighters here, 5 from the UFC, 5 from one championship. So I went with the two biggest promotions on the planet. Some will say Bellator's number 2. Okay, but their women's roster isn't as deep, and we really didn't have as many examples of what I was looking for. All right, so let's start with the UFC. All right, first up, Paige Van Zant. Paige Van Zant came in. She was very marketable, young, blonde, perky, had just everything about her screamed it factor. And she was natural athlete. However, her abilities just eventually got proven as not good enough. She wasn't developing her skills as well as she needed to be. So this is an example of a fighter who is marketed purely based on marketability and just did not prove out as good as far as, skills and ability go. Next up, her arch nemesis, PVZ's current arch nemesis, Macy Barber. Now, Barber is being promoted somewhat based on merit. I mean, she's coming in, she's in the UFC, she's 3 wins, 3 finishes. However, there is a lot of marketing behind her. Okay, she came in off the Dana White Contender Series. They really want to push those fighters. That's obvious. They want that show to be a successful venue. Her second fight, she comes in, misses weight at strawweight. She moves up to flyweight, faces a fellow former strawweight, wins that fight, gets boosted to number 12 in the flyweight rankings off of her first fight in the division. Second fight in the division, she gets another win. They move her up 2 more spots to number 10, but she beat someone who is ranked lower than her. So that's how you can tell that they're basing it a lot on marketability, because she has a mouth on her. Barber has a mouth on her. She is calling out fighters left and right, mostly PVZ. She's hoping to get the same amount of marketability that PVZ has, just without as much natural charisma. But for the most part, she is so far proving her ability in the ring, if not so much technically, then physically, definitely. All right, next up. If it weren't for this one, there wouldn't be women in the UFC. Rowdy Ronda Rousey, the former bantamweight queen. She is an example of the third group that had both. She was marketable. She could talk. She had charisma. Being blonde doesn't hurt. Rousey had the killer ability. She was finishing fighters in the first round. Finished everybody except Miesha Tate in the first round. Now, her problem came when her skills weren't progressing. She kind of plateaued. And then she fought 2 fighters who came in with the perfect game plan and perfect skill sets to beat her. And that was ultimately Ronda Rousey's downfall. But Ronda Rousey falls into, the true superstar group, that rarest of groups that had both marketability and fightability. I still haven't seen anyone quite like her in mixed martial arts that can match in the women's divisions, that can match her level of both marketability and fighting ability. Still haven't seen it yet. Hopefully we do get someone eventually. Next up, current flyweight queen, Valentina Shevchenko. Now, Valentina Shevchenko, nobody can doubt her merit, okay? She went toe-to-toe with Amanda Nunes twice at bantamweight, and then came down to strawweight and is wrecking house down there. And she does have some charisma to her. You know, she has the dance going on. She, again, being blonde does not hurt. It just doesn't. No matter where you go, being blonde just doesn't hurt. So she does have some marketability. However, a lot of her marketability is hurt by the fact that her fights often tend to be boring. Like if an opponent doesn't fight to Valentina Shevchenko's style, it's going to be a boring night. It's going to be a 25-minute fight decision. And that's her problem. So her merit cannot be questioned. Marketability definitely can somewhat. Now, granted, she has some good finishes too, but between those finishes are just some snoozers. And then finally, the bantamweight and featherweight queen of the UFC. I don't like to call any fighter the greatest of all time, but this one is definitely knocking on that door. The Lioness, Amanda Nunes. Amanda is an example of a fighter who gets by purely based on merit. She's just not that charismatic of a fighter. Fans don't take to her as much. Unfortunately, her fights don't sell. No matter how many fighters she knocks out, no matter how many fighters she pounds out on the ground or knocks out on the feet, she just hasn't been able to cross that line into superstardom. I mean, for all the greatness, the physical greatness that she has achieved in the ring, it just has not been able to translate outside of the ring. So Amanda Nunes, to me, is the epitome of a merit-based fighter. UFC just doesn't know how to market her, unfortunately, which is dumb because I think they definitely could. I mean, first openly gay champion in the UFC. That should be easily marketable. But they haven't really pushed that for whatever reason. So, Amanda Nunes, queen of meritability. All right, so let's move over to one championship. All right, first up, the golden girl of one championship MMA, at least for now. Angela Unstoppable Lee, who isn't unstoppable anymore. She did get stopped. So Lee has shown good ability in the ring. I mean, she's avenged one of her 2 losses. She does have some holes in her game, but she does. I mean, up until this year, when she lost 2 fights, she was undefeated. So she has the ability. But man, they really push her into marketability. I mean, they try to push her as the hometown hero of Singapore, even though she's never actually lived there. She was born in Canada, grew up in Hawaii, but her dad's from Singapore, so they push her as Singaporean. So she's more of a merit fighter, she's a little bit of a merit fighter, but definitely a lot of marketing behind her as well. I mean, it's just crazy. And it doesn't hurt that she's good looking, too. Next up, Lee's arch rival, Jingnan Xiong. Xiong is almost entirely a merit-based fighter. Solid ability. I mean, first to beat Angela Lee. Only has 1 loss before this year. And then she lost to Lee in the rematch. Got finished within the closing seconds of the 5th round. Xiong has mostly solid ability, particularly in the striking and boxing. She does have some marketability, however, and that's based purely on where she's from, China. China is a huge untapped market for MMA right now, or at least every promotion worth its salt hopes that it's a huge untapped market. So she's the first female Chinese world champion, and that's why one championship really brought her in and pushed her to the championship. But she definitely gets by on her ability more than marketability because she's not good looking. She's not very charismatic. She's soft spoken. She has that quiet confidence that most people just don't appreciate. So Xiong is definitely an example of merit way more than marketability. All right, next up, this fighter has yet to make her debut in one championship, but she's being brought in and she's going to fight in the big one championship on the big cards, even though she's 0-1 as a pro. Colby Northcutt. Okay, this is an example of a fighter being brought in and pushed way more on marketability than her merit. Okay, she's 0-1 as a pro. I guess she has like a lot of karate championships. I don't know what she brings in, other than the fact that she is blonde. She's tall, thin, blonde, and she's Sage Northcutt's sister. So one is bringing her in mostly based on her being Sage Northcutt's sister. They already signed Sage, so they'll be the second ever brother-sister duo signed to a major promotion. One championship already has Angela and Christian Lee. Now they're going to have Sage and Colby Northcutt. Other than that, there was really no reason for them to bring Colby Northcutt in, at least until she got a couple of more wins in. And her only MMA fight was like well over a year ago. I mean, well over a year ago, if I remember right. So, good example of the marketable fighter, more than merit. Next up is someone making her pro MMA debut this weekend. Again, in the Big One show, Ritu Phogat. Now, she is unproven in MMA, but she's being brought in based on, one, she is a Commonwealth Games wrestling champion. So she is known outside of MMA circles. 2, she is known all over her home country of India, which has over 1 billion people. So she might not be naturally charismatic. She's not pretty or anything, and that's nothing against her personally. It's just an observation. But Ritu Phogat is being brought in based on because one wants to break into India. They already plan on going to India next year. I think they might have already scheduled their first event there. So they are bringing her in to help them break into India. I mean, her and her sisters had a movie based on them, and it is the highest grossing movie in Indian history, Indian cinema history. So obviously, she's being brought in. Yes, she's bringing in a set of actual skills, but we don't know how well it'll translate to MMA in the long run. So for now, we have to say she's being brought in from her marketability in a region with a huge population that one championship wants to market to. So she's, for now, until she proves her skill in MMA, and she's not going to in this fight. She's in her first fight. She's being given a gimme fight. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, a gimme fight. So for now, she's being brought in based on a gimme fight. So for now, she remains firmly in the marketability camp. And then finally, the current strawweight kickboxing and Muay Thai champion, and possibly future MMA champion as well, Stamp Fairtex. Stamp is an example who she goes into the third category. I gotta admit, she goes into the third category if everything works out for her. Okay, look, she has the ability, at least as far as Muay Thai and kickboxing goes. Been doing it her whole life. MMA, she's 3-0 so far. We don't know how her ground game holds up against good ground game fighters, but we know that she can win in MMA so far. And she seems to have a very high ceiling in the sport, based mostly because she has that solid base, Muay Thai base going to her. And she's also very marketable. Okay, she's cute. She's not my type personally, but yeah, she's cute. And she's charismatic. Now, me personally, I think the dancing is overrated. I think it's kind of goofy the way she does it, and the way they push her based on that is just cringe. Oh, it's so cringe. Michael Schiavello, the voice. You're so cringy. Oh. But I can see how it appeals to other people. I'm not afraid to admit when I can say that I see how it appeals to other people. So for now, she is definitely marketable. She definitely has the abilities to get by based on merit alone. From what we've seen so far in MMA, she's only had 3 fights. She's untested, but she definitely has shown the ability so far. So if she can combine that marketability and become a proven MMA fighter, she is a potential superstar. The third group, the rarest of the rare. Maybe not Ronda Rousey huge, but you can definitely be a superstar across Asia, at least Southeast Asia, and that's a pretty big area. So yeah, Stamp Fairtex. Marketed very well, but she also has been getting by based on her skills. So a very good example of that third rarest group. All right, so that's my little talk on merit versus marketability in MMA, and I like to think that I backed it up well with some good examples. But really, I want to hear from you, the viewer. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on merit versus marketability, or the upcoming fights, the fights from this past weekend, whatever you want to talk about. Put it in the comments down below. In the meantime, please give a like. And hey, what are you waiting for? If you haven't yet, subscribe to WMMA Scene Now, the best, fastest growing women's mixed martial arts dedicated platform on YouTube. Oh, before I go, Shout out to Shino Van Hoos, my Team Shino shirt. Wearing it. Loud and proud. Oh, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications. And we'll see you next time.